This webinar is part of our educational series called Clinical Trials Explained: Know Your Options. Our goal with the series is to help patients, caregivers, and families better understand clinical trials so they can feel informed, empowered, and confident when exploring their options. In our first episode, we covered the foundations of clinical trials and how research advances into patient care. Today, we're building on that by focusing on how to actually find clinical trials on Trican's platform, understand the conversation with your oncologist, the team behind the trials, as well as the logistics. This way, you can discover enrollment with clarity and confidence. A few quick housekeeping notes. All attendees will be muted and video will be off for the duration of this program. Please feel free to insert questions in the chat at any time. This session is also being recorded so it can be shared with others who may benefit. My name is Annie Dalton Flores. I'm Executive Director of Sky Foundation. I'm joined behind the scenes by Jamie Geyer, our business manager, who helps coordinate many of our programs and initiatives, including this webinar series. Jamie will be behind the scenes, as I mentioned. If there's anything you need, or if you're having connection issues, please feel free to reach out to her directly at jamie@skyfoundationinc.org. Sky Foundation, Inc. is a Michigan-based nonprofit organization founded by pancreatic cancer survivor Sheila Sky Castleman. Sky raises awareness and funds innovative research for the early detection and treatment of pancreatic cancer. But what makes Sky's role especially important is that we fund what's called seed grants in pancreatic cancer research. Every clinical trial, every new treatment, every advancement you hear about begins as research. And at Sky Foundation, we're proud to help those early ideas, planting the seed that allows promising discoveries to grow into clinical trials. This slide shows how Sky helps move research into clinical trials. From an idea in the lab to seed funding, to early data collection, to larger grants, and ultimately to clinical trials that become real treatment options for patients. But creating trials is only part of the story. Once those trials exist, patients and families need to understand how to find them, evaluate them, and decide whether they're right for them or not. That's where education becomes just as important as research, because options only matter if people know they exist and feel confident in navigating them. Our goal is not just to fund research, but to help ensure patients have access to information, guidance, and clarity at every stage. So today, we're shifting from how trials are created to what happens next, how to actually find the clinical trials, talk to your oncologist, and understand who is on your team. We are incredibly grateful to partner with Trican Health on this educational series. I'd now like to turn it over to Mike Harris, co-founder of Trican Health and tonight's moderator for the Q&A. Mike, welcome.
Thanks very much, Annie, and wonderful to see you all on this webinar. As Annie said, creating the research, understanding the science, and ensuring that new treatments are in the lab and getting out to some patients in a trial is one step, but is another step to think of how patients can access, find, and ultimately enroll in those trials to get the potential benefits of these emerging medicines. Trican Health was founded with a simple principle of helping ensure that every cancer patient has access to clinical trials and knows that they are part of their options for future treatments. So it's important for every patient to be able to not only know that trials are out there, but to know which ones might be the best match for them and how to advance forward. Now, I co-founded Trican Health along with my wife, Dr. Kimya Harris. My background is in technology, so specifically focused on understanding platform science, data and analytics, artificial intelligence, and I spent a career in the technology realm making sure that there were an ability to match different parties together to come together to actually come to a solution. My wife, Kimya Harris, got her PhD at University of Michigan. She's a cancer researcher. She is also a cancer survivor herself, two-time breast cancer survivor. And she went through the ordeal as a caregiver for her mother, who succumbed to pancreatic cancer after a battle many years ago. So Kimya's background in the scientific research as a caregiver and as a patient, combined with my background as a technologist and understanding the platform, came together to form Trican Health. Let me turn it back to Annie Dalton, who is the executive director of Sky Foundation, to give a further introduction not only to Kimya, but also to Dr. Jamie Mills of the University of Michigan. Annie, back to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Presenting first is Dr. Kimya Harris, PhD, co-founder and CEO of Trican Health. Dr. Kimya Harris has spent her career chasing cancer, from the lab bench to the boardroom. With more than 30 years in cancer research, drug discovery, and biotech leadership, she has helped bring breakthrough cancer therapies from an idea to a clinical trial. A two-time breast cancer survivor and caregiver for loved ones fighting cancer, Kimya knows firsthand the challenges patients face navigating treatment options. That mix of scientific expertise and lived experience inspires her and to found Trican Health, a platform that helps patients and clinicians easily find and understand clinical trials. Through Trican, Kimya is turning knowledge into empowerment, helping patients take an active role in their care and helping biopharma bring innovative treatments to those who need it most. After Kimya, we will welcome Dr. Jamie Mills, Clinical Assistant Professor, Emerging Scholar in Clinical Trials, Rogel and Blondie Center for Pancreatic Cancer. Dr. Jamie Mills is a physician, scientist, and GI medical oncologist at the University of Michigan, specializing in pancreatic, bile duct, and liver cancers, as well as cancers of unknown primary. She earned her MD and PhD in cancer biology through the Medical Scientist Training Program at MUSC and completed her internal medicine residency and hematology oncology fellowship at the University of Michigan in the Physician Scientist Training Pathway. Dr. Mills focuses on translating research in pancreatic cancer epigenetics into meaningful clinical trials and improved outcomes for patients. Outside of her work at the university, Dr. Mills is an active member in the Ann Arbor community and enjoys spending her time engaged in various activities with her husband and 5 children. Now, Kimya, I will hand it off to you for the presentation on Trican's platform.
Fantastic. Thank you, Annie. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak with you and to also be able to co-sponsor this really important webinar series that the Sky Foundation and Trican Health are passionate about bringing to patients and caregivers and clinicians and any interested parties. It's a really important topic, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk about it. So, as you heard about me, I am a cancer researcher by training, and my experience professionally helped to lead to the founding of Trican Health. But the most important part of my background experience was my experience both as a patient, having been diagnosed twice with breast cancer, and as a caregiver for my mom. And when my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer back in 2007, we thought we had all the expertise, experience, tools necessary to navigate the diagnosis. So I had all of my experience in cancer research, cancer drug development. So I thought I knew the ecosystem pretty well. My mom was an oncologist. She was an expert in the treatment of patients with cancer. So we thought we knew the language, we thought we knew the resources, we thought we had the network of people available to us. We really thought we had what we needed. And yet, I would say in both of our cases, and particularly in hers, that moment of diagnosis and, every moment after throughout the whole treatment journey was overwhelming. There was just so much information, so many decisions to make, so many things to navigate that even with all of our background, we felt overwhelmed. And I think that's true for most patients, if not all patients and caregivers. And, one of the things that I wish we had known about and perhaps done differently was centered around clinical trials. I wish that we had looked for clinical trials sooner. We knew about clinical trials, and my mom did participate in a clinical trial, except she did it at the very end because she fell into, as did we, the myth that clinical trials are only a last resort. And so even though we knew to think about them, she participated after she had tried every standard of care option when her body was weakened, the cancer was strengthened, and ultimately she had to leave the clinical trial and she passed away shortly thereafter. And so that informs a lot of what I do. The three things that I wish I knew then around clinical trials are that trials are actually a form of treatment. They're not the last resort. Timing matters. Again, thinking about them earlier in her treatment decision process, I think would have been much more impactful. And that information is power. Knowing about trials, knowing where to look, knowing how to find them, that's power in a moment that is really powerless in many other ways. And so that's what I'm going to cover in today's section of the talk. I'm going to talk about clinical trials. I'm going to recap what Drs. Azmi and Dr. Al-Halak spoke about in our episode 1. I'm going to talk about some of the myths around clinical trials. And finally, I'm going to talk about Trican Health as a resource for you to be able to get information about clinical trials and find potential trial options. And I'm going to do a demo of the site as well. So let's start with the basics. What's the difference between clinical trials and standard of care? And I think it's really important to understand this research continuum. And Annie spoke about this a little bit in her introduction. Anything that is an approved treatment today started as a clinical trial. Well, it started as bench research and then animal research, but then went into clinical trials before it got approved. So think about FOLFIRINOX. FOLFIRINOX is standard of care for pancreatic cancer patients today. FOLFIRINOX was actually in clinical trials when my mom was battling the disease back in 2009. So she did not get FOLFIRINOX because it wasn't standard of care for her when she was going through cancer. But had she participated in a clinical trial for FOLFIRINOX, she might have had access to the drug back in 2009. So anything that is approved today was in clinical trials in the past. Similarly, today's clinical trials are testing tomorrow's standard of care. So the future treatments that are hopefully going to keep pushing that survival number for pancreatic cancer higher and higher, that are going to help give pancreatic cancer patients better options. Think about targeted treatments like the RAS targeting therapies, the ablation methodologies, new chemo combinations. All of those are being tested in clinical trials now, and the only way to access them now is through clinical trials. And one of the quotes that I actually love is, standard of care is not a fixed concept, it's a moment in time. What was standard of care for my mom back in 2009 is not standard of care today. We have better options that have moved the survival percentages since then, and that's where we are headed with more things in clinical trials today. They will become the standard of care of tomorrow. So let's talk a little bit about what we learned in the last episode, episode 1. Dr. Azmi talked about the early stages of research developing new cancer therapies. So he talked to us about how his lab first works to figure out what does the cancer cell need to grow, right? Understand what the cancer cell is dependent on to grow and then target that. So they first figure that out, then they develop drugs that target those nutrients and pathways that the cancer cell's dependent on, test them in the lab. That's the little microscope on my diagram on the prior slide. If it looks good there, they test them in mice. If it looks good there, then promising treatments move into phase 1 clinical testing. And he gave us an example that he personally was involved with, a drug called selinexor. And he talked a lot about how the Sky Foundation played a critical role in helping to fund the research that led to those treatments, and how important that early research is, because you need it to find the drugs, develop the drugs, and test the drugs all the way through animal models before you get to human clinical testing. After he finished, Dr. Al-Halak took the baton and then moved us into the clinical testing phases. So that's the phases of the drug development that involve human research. Dr. Al-Halak covered how all cancer treatments are tested in clinical trial, and that's in fact, as I told you, where standard of care comes from. He educated us on the phases of a clinical trial, where a phase 1 tends to be a smaller group of patients, and they're asking if the drug is safe for patients in a phase 1. In a phase 2, there are more patients involved, and they're continuing to study the safety of the drug, which is probably the most important thing. And then they start to look at the efficacy of the drug. Is this drug starting to improve the outcomes? Is the tumor getting smaller? Is the patient living longer without tumor progression? And if the drug continues to look good in a larger population in a phase 2 trial, the drug will then move into a much larger phase 3 trial, which is sometimes called a randomized trial. And that's because they are testing it in a head-to-head comparison against standard of care. So the idea there is you can have a drug that is safe, you can have a drug that is effective, but you want it to be better than what's currently available, because we don't want drugs that are half as good as what's currently available. So proving out that a drug is more effective than standard of care happens in phase 3. And then he talked about how every patient should be considering a clinical trial at every treatment decision. And he talked about questions that we should ask, that every patient should ask their doctor. And so he also talked about how doctors are very willing and interested in hearing those questions and having those discussions. And the last thing he emphasized was that in pancreatic cancer, trials are often some of the best opportunities for both patients, so treatment opportunities, and for progress. And then he got to debunking some of the clinical trial myths. So what do I mean by that? There are 3 common myths around clinical trials. The first is the placebo myth. And in this case, it's the idea that, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, a patient with cancer gets a sugar pill. You'll hear this often. I don't want to be in a trial because I'm afraid that I'm going to get a sugar pill. That is a myth. The fact here is that a patient with cancer cannot be denied treatment if treatment is available. It is unethical to give a patient no treatment if treatment is available in a cancer clinical trial. So rest assured that in cancer clinical trials, you will either always get standard therapy, the new treatment, so the thing that's being tested, or standard plus new treatment, a combination of those. The second myth is the guinea pig myth. And so in this case, it's this idea that, oh, I don't want to be some guinea pig in a scientific experiment, and I don't know what's going to happen. Here again, that's a myth. The reality is that clinical trials are some of the most highly regulated forms of treatment and medicine available today. Patients are closely monitored. In fact, sometimes you get even more monitoring than you would in other forms of treatment. And that's because patient safety is the top priority in a clinical trial. They're always making sure that what's happening is safe for the patient. And the third myth, and this is the one that hits home the most for me, is that clinical trials are the last resort. This idea that, oh, I'll get to that when I'm ready. First, I need to do every form of standard of care possible. And that's perhaps the most harmful because it means two things. One is that patients can miss out on potentially life-saving treatments in a clinical trial at the appropriate time. Something you may not know is that many clinical trials are actually limited by what stage of treatment you are in. The eligibility for the trials are limited by what stage of treatment you are in. So some trials are only for newly diagnosed patients. Some trials are only for patients that are early in their treatment lines. And so if you are later and have tried every possible treatment, you're not eligible for a large number of the trials. And the second problem with that is that, as it was for my mother, when you are earlier in your treatment journey, the body can be a little bit stronger. It hasn't gone through many really taxing treatments, which weaken the body. And the body's ability to benefit from that treatment then is greater. And so thinking about it, considering it at every stage from diagnosis on is really important. And finally, I want to emphasize that this isn't just sort of one person talking about the importance of clinical trials. It's actually the national guidelines on clinical trials as an option for patient treatment. So the NCCN is a national group, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, and they put forth guidelines in every form of cancer. And for pancreatic cancer and for many others, they explicitly say that every patient should be considering a clinical trial at every stage of treatment. And they emphasize that you shouldn't wait for your doctor to bring up the clinical trials, as Dr. Al-Halak told us, and I'm sure as Dr. Jamie Mills will emphasize today, start the conversation and learn about all of your treatment options. And so what I want to do next is take you through an important resource for you to learn about those treatment options. So I'm going to switch screens here, and we're going to hope that this works. Terrific. And that is the Trican Health platform. As Mike told you, Trican Health was built with the mission of helping every patient gain access to clinical trial options, to understand them, and to be able to look for potential matches. So if you come here to tricanhealth.com, you will see our homepage. There's lots of resources on this page. We have a video resource where Mike actually recorded walking through how to do a search, and that is right here. You heard a little blurb there. We have a Learn site where you can see lots of resources on clinical trials and what to ask your doctor, and just a lot of really helpful supportive resources. But let's go to Find a Trial. So if you click here at the top, Find a Trial, it takes you to this page where you can begin your search.
And Kimya,
Yes.
as you go through this, we have a question online, so I'm going to feed you the scenario if you would plug it in, and that way we can give a demo, addressing a specific attendee's question, if that's okay.
Terrific. Yes. Talk me through it.
Great. So we have someone who has had surgery, had Whipple surgery and chemotherapy 4 years ago. So I'm going to assume it was pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma that he was diagnosed with.
All right, so we're going to answer question 1 with PDAC. I will just, if you'll indulge me, point out that one of the categories here is no cancer, search preventive trials. And I just want to highlight that because if anyone out there is like me, I didn't know that there were preventive trials. And if you are at higher risk for pancreatic cancer because of family members, it's really important to know that there are preventive trials out there that will help with monitoring and maybe blood tests, maybe additional screening. So it's an option that not a lot of people think about, and I just wanted to highlight that. But okay, so we've clicked PDAC. Oh,
just one clarification, that preventive trials is specifically for those who have not been diagnosed with cancer previously, right? But they're at sort of high risk for it. Is that right?
Exactly. Okay. Yep. Okay, so next.
Let's say Detroit, just to make it somewhere nearby.
Okay. Going with Detroit. Next.
Previously, so again, it's been 4 years since they've had it, but since they had surgery, we'll assume it was, say, stage 2.
Okay. And one of the things I'd like to just point out again as we're going through it is these little eyes at the top, and you'll see them throughout our site. If you hover over it, it will give you definitions, explanations. So if any step you're thinking, I don't know what that question means, this is there to help you understand it. Okay.
He has had surgery and chemotherapy. I don't know which one. We'll assume FOLFIRINOX.
Or we can also just say, I don't know.
Fair enough. And this individual has the KRAS mutation.
Okay. So I will take it from here then, unless there were further criteria.
The one added piece specifically had a G12D mutation within KRAS. And the real question is, there's a follow-on question, which is phase 2 and 3 specific trials that would be addressing this area. So phase 2 and 3 for G12D would be the additional components. But with that, I'll let you have it.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you. That was a great setup for the search. And what I want to do now is talk you through the results. So first of all, what you see here up at the top, you see the filters. So these are the questions that we just answered. And these are all the criteria that were put in. You can at any point, adjust them, remove them, say, I want to clear them all. I want to search for a particular drug name. If you come down here, each of these drop-down menus then shows you the questions that were asked. There are a couple of additional ones here, like line of therapy, that physicians may be interested in, or patients and caregivers. So you can adjust your search criteria here, and the results will continue to adjust. So for example, if I X out stage 2, we'll see that our number of results went from 8 to 11. So I'm going to go back then and put stage 2 back in for our example. This is where the results are all shown. And so you would let's click on the first one. And now I want to orient you to what you're seeing. And I know it's a little overwhelming to see it for the first time, for those of you that are looking at it the first time. But I can assure you that if you start to adjust to and get to know what each section of information shows you, it gets easier to look at with every one because our format is consistent in every single trial. So here we have the title of the trial. This is the summary. That is our methodology. And every summary, we include 4 pieces of information. The first is, what's the trial testing? So here you see it's to find the best dose and see if it is safe and effective at treating patients who have the KRAS G12C mutation. So I believe you said the question was about a G12D patient, Mike. So this patient would not be the right person. I mean, this trial would not be the right trial because this is for a KRAS G12C, but we're going to talk about it anyway. It also tells us if the drug is FDA approved. I think that's really important because some drugs that are in trials for pancreatic cancer are actually approved in other cancers. So there's a degree of confidence knowing that that drug has already been tested and is safe. There are other drugs that are brand new that may be designed just for pancreatic cancer, but it's an important piece of information. The third sentence is, we're on the 4th sentence. How is the drug given? And in this case, the drug is given as a pill and can be taken at home. That may be important to patients that maybe can't get to a trial site or can't do an infusion for other reasons. As we move through, let me point out as well, up here at the top, it tells you what type of treatment the trial is. So this is where you would see if it's a chemotherapy trial, if it's a targeted trial. In this case, it's targeted immunotherapy. So that's where you would get that information. As we move down the snapshot, you can see here it tells you what phases they are. So I think you said the patient was looking for a phase 2 trial. Again, this one wouldn't be appropriate because it's not G12D, but it is a phase 2 trial, phase 1, phase 2. This is a direct link over to the clinicaltrials.gov site, should the patient want that direct link. Here's where you have general contact information for the trial sponsor, the person that is running the trial, the company that is running the trial. Relevant biomarkers are shown here. Under trial info, we have the enrollment number. So this is a pretty big phase 1, phase 2, and it's been running since 2024. The treatment groups, this is really important. We wanted to show this visually because it drives home the point that nobody's getting a placebo. Everyone in this trial will get this treatment, FMC 376. Over here on the right is where you see the location and the contact information. So this trial is in Detroit. It's being held at Karmanos. The contact information for the trial coordinator is there, so you can reach out to the trial site. If you decided, you know what, I don't want to stay in Detroit for this trial and I want to go to Boston. Again, you just click on the site and you can see the information for the Boston site at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And then down here in the bottom right is about eligibility for the trial, what line of therapy it is, what are the criteria to join. And these are the parts of the information that you really want to discuss with your physician to find out if you're eligible for the trial. And that is our first trial. So let me just show you one more so that you can see that they are similar for every single trial. So this one is a KRAS G12D mutation. So let's click on that one. Same summary format. This drug is being used alone or in combination with chemotherapy to see if it's safe and effective. It tells you how the drug works. It blocks the G12D protein, the KRAS G12D protein. It is not yet approved. Here we see that there are patients that might get chemotherapy in combination, and we see that those are all FDA approved. And lastly, some of the drugs in this study are given as a pill, while others are given as an IV. So same pieces of information in every summary. Again, you can see the contact information. This one's an Eli Lilly trial. And then the biomarkers. Here you can see there are 3 treatment groups. Again, none of them have placebo. They all have either the drug or the drug in combination with chemotherapy. And over to the right, we know that this is taking place at the Karmanos Cancer Institute. And then here are the lines of therapy. So every trial, and then we can just keep going next to the next trial. What I do want to show you is, let's say you said, well, this one, let's say our example patient said, well, this one looks good. It's KRAS G12D. It's a phase 1, but maybe it's the right one for me. They can share it and either download it as a PDF, copy the link, email it to their physician or their navigator or clinical care team, or they can save it. And I want to point out that we do not require any registration to save the first 3 trials. We want to make it as easy as possible for patients to do searches and find information. After the first 3 trials, registering is necessary via email or phone number. And that's so that you can set up an album where you save all of your trials that you're interested in. You can go back to it, you can add to it, you can delete. It's really to make the tool more usable for the patient. One final thing I want to point out, and then I'll close out of this example, is when the searches are done, they are sorted by trials that are closest to you. And so in this case, there are 8 results that meet our criteria. And what I would strongly suggest, and I'm going to get to that in the next slide, is that you play with the search criteria because the number of trials will go up or down. And one of the things is it is really important to look for your biomarkers for a trial, but it's also important to not look for your biomarkers for a trial. And the reason that I say that is you will see a broader set of results. So first of all, you can see there are 45 results, again, sorted by distance. So you can see the ones that are closest to you first. But here's where you start to see things like advanced radiation techniques and ablation techniques. So I strongly encourage that. And then just very quickly, I want to pop back over to the slides and touch on one final thing related to how to search for a trial. And that is this idea that we've developed called the bullseye approach. So step one is you do your search. And as I said, start with your mutation and then move out to the additional layers. So any RAS mutation, any PDAC tumor, any solid tumor. All of them might be relevant. The most relevant is the one for your mutation. And once you've done that, then you can evaluate the information, decide if it's a trial of interest. Step 3 is share it with your physician and your clinical care team to discuss if it's right for you. And step 4 is ask your doctor to contact the site or reach out to them yourself. And again, reiterating, it's so important to start the conversation and bring it up with your physician. And here to tell us more about that is Dr. Jamie Mills. So I will stop sharing now and hand it over to Dr. Mills, who can tell us much more about that conversation to have with your physician. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris, for that introduction and for creating this wonderful site that helps patients find trials so much easier. So I'm here to say, now what? And I'm glad that we have a real patient example to use, which can really help us to say, what do we do next? So the next step is talk to your oncologist. We're here to help you. We're here to translate for you what these trials look like, what they mean, and whether or not you're actually a candidate for it. You're not alone in figuring out these next steps. Your oncologist can help you. And so I can say right off the bat with the trials that we're looking for in the example, with a patient who's had surgery 4 years ago, they're not going to be eligible for very many trials. And that's because, as was pointed out in the comments, that you're technically stage 0 now. You're cancer-free now. And so we don't do trials for patients who are 4 years from surgery, but there was that nice feature on the website that talks about the preventative trials, and you are at a higher risk for having your cancer come back. And there may be a preventative trial that would apply to you. And that would be my advice to you, would be to search in preventative trials. And so, that's what I do. When you bring me a trial, I look at the characteristics of your cancer. I look at the characteristics of you, stage, prior treatments, other health issues, things like that. I look at the features of the trial, and that's where I can help you decide if it's a phase trial that you want to be part of, what the targets are, whether that's something that you want to be involved in, as well as the types of intervention, things like surgery, radiation, and medications. I think the logistics are really important. It can be a real barrier for patients to be able to get enrolled on trials if they don't live in an area where trials are being run. And so it becomes really important if you do have a support system outside of Michigan, outside of your local oncology team, somewhere that you could go, you could stay. Those are also good options and places that you should search for trials, because it may open doors that aren't available to you locally. And trials are by no means one size fits all. This is really complicated, and having this wonderful resource is very helpful to help narrow down some of the options that are out there, but it still is going to end up being confusing and overwhelming, and that's okay. That's why you have your care team and why the next step is to talk to us. So Don't be overwhelmed or confused by what your results are. Just bring them back to your oncologist. So how do you talk to us? Well, you have a primary oncologist, presumably the person who's doing all of your day-to-day things, managing your chemotherapy, the side effects of your chemotherapy, and prescribing you your medications. That may or may not be the site where the trial is being run. For example, we saw a couple of trials come up in Detroit, and I may not have those trials, but I may have a patient who qualifies for those trials. And Detroit and Ann Arbor are not terribly far apart. We end up sharing a lot of patients and swapping them around for trials. And so come to me as your primary oncologist. You can do this at every single stage. At the very, excuse me, at the very first visit, I'm going to give you the information that you need to be equipped to use the Trican Health site. So you need to know your diagnosis. So we saw that we chose PDAC, pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, but there are other types of pancreatic cancer, and I will help you understand what your diagnosis is. Same for your stage. I will help you understand what is the stage and what are some of the types of things that you should be searching for, the types of interventions and the treatment lines, those types of things. So line of therapy becomes very important. And a note on line of therapy too, it really does have some nuance to it. So you may have had your cancer resected, gone to surgery, had a Whipple, and then had your adjuvant chemotherapy, which is chemotherapy given after surgery. But if your cancer returns within a certain timeline, that adjuvant chemotherapy then gets counted as first line therapy. And so you're actually a second line candidate. But if the cancer recurs after a certain amount of time, then you count as a first line patient. So it can be extraordinarily confusing. And that is why we go through extensive training to get where we are. And that is why we're here to help you. We're here to help be that guide for you. There are other factors. We list the mutation status. So that's NGS, next generation sequencing. We need those results to understand opportunities for targeted therapies. And then HER2 status is something that when I see patients for second opinions, I find is missing a lot of the time. So that is another place of advocacy that you can do for yourself, is to make sure that all of the appropriate testing is done. And that's why second opinions are important, because HER2 status can impact your ability to access trials. We are testing HER2 targeted therapies. So this is a screenshot, just like you would get from using the Trican Health site. And all I need from you is that number that's listed in blue. Usually I can also find it by the title if you bring me a printout or something that shows the trial that you're interested in. But really what I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at clinicaltrials.gov as my first step. And that is the number that will get me to the exact trial that we're talking about and that we need to review as being a good fit for you or not. So I mentioned second opinions. Everyone who's diagnosed with this disease needs to have a second opinion. Whether you get 1 or 2 or 3 second opinions is totally up to you and your resources and your ability to take on all of that information. But these are doctors who are maybe at a little bit higher volume center. They might be further away from you, so it's harder to get to them on a day-to-day basis. But they may have opportunities for trials and other connections that can help you throughout the course of your treatment. So you can see these people periodically, particularly after having scans done or things like that. And they can be a very helpful part of your team. And so, like I said, these are usually people at large academic medical centers. I would recommend getting 1, 2, 3 second opinions usually, so that you have a few people that you can reach out to at different stages of your treatment course. And you can use your patient portal for periodic check-ins and when scans are done. And you can even do some of this via telehealth. So it can really open doors for a lot of patients. What not to do. Don't bring me more than a couple trials. It's not because I don't want to look at them all and talk to you about all of them. It's simply because none of us have unlimited resources and especially unlimited time. I'm usually pretty up to date on trials, so I'm always thinking about trials in the background for my patients, but I can't keep up on everything. These are moving targets. They happen all the time open and close and move around and different sites open. So it really is helpful when you bring me trials, especially if you've done kind of the first pass of thinking about whether or not you qualify for the trial. And then that lets me sit down with you at your appointment and really go through the nitty-gritty details of the trials that you bring me. And the other thing not to do is don't be worried that we're going to take offense. We share patients all the time, and we all ultimately want the best outcome for our patients. And I am never going to be offended if you want to go and see another oncologist. And in fact, I encourage it. So the other piece of this is that it's not just me and you, we have a whole team. A lot of the people that you'll find listed on the Trican Health site as the contact are the study coordinators. And that is the first person that I go to once I've done a cursory review of the eligibility criteria. So the rules that are in place for you have to have these criteria to be in the trial, and you cannot have these qualities to be in the trial. I look at both of those lists of things, and then I talk to my study coordinator, who does a much more in-depth review and something called pre-screening, where that person will look really we have our own protocols behind the scenes that are hundreds of pages long, and they will go through line by line and make sure that it is a good fit for you. And they will also be the point of contact throughout your time on the trial. They're someone who reaches out to you. You see them face-to-face in clinic. They review your medications. They talk to you about all sorts of things and track your appointments and make sure you're on track. There are a lot of safety things in place. So we mentioned you are not a guinea pig in these trials. There is so much safety oversight. It gets a little bit ridiculous sometimes. So the institutional review board, there can be one at the institution running the trial, and then there's usually also a central one. So there's 2 committees that are doing ongoing safety monitoring throughout the course of the trial. There's people collecting data and storing it and reporting and making sure that the data is appropriately handled. And then there are separate safety monitors who also keep you safe. I saw a question in the chat about who sponsors these trials. Is it drug companies? Yes, many of these are drug companies, particularly in the KRAS world, where these are new drugs that are coming out, but it's not always the case. There are also trials that are sponsored by funding from the NIH through the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, as well as private grants, foundation grants, as we heard from Sky Foundation, and many other pots of money that come in, and that is known as the sponsor who's paying for the trial. And then your oncologist is a PI, or a principal investigator. And so there's going to be a point person at every institution, as well as a point person for the trial overall. They're ensuring that all of the protocols are followed to a T. They assist with any decision making. Sometimes patients do fall in somewhat of a gray area, and they help kind of make that decision of whether the patient qualifies for the trial. And importantly, there is no direct financial benefit. So I am not making any money by putting you on a trial. I'm not losing any money when you choose not to be on a trial. It's really, I'm here to help you find the best thing in your course of treatment. And then there are sometimes other people involved, people reviewing scans, statisticians, things like that. So let's go briefly through each thing that I look at when you bring me a trial. I look at the characteristics of your cancer. What stage were you at diagnosis? What stage are you now? As we learn, those can be different. What treatments have you had? Did you recur after having surgery? That's a little bit different than if you present with metastatic disease at the beginning. What is your histology? Is it neuroendocrine tumor, adenocarcinoma, adenosquamous? There's a whole bunch of them. And some trials are very specific in excluding everything except adenocarcinoma. And then I look at you. What is your organ function, your bone marrow function? What other health issues do you have? Do I think you'll be safe on this trial is really something that I consider. And then also, what are your ethical and moral feelings about research overall, and the intervention that's being proposed? Some patients don't want to undergo additional procedures, which trials sometimes require. Some patients have problems with storing their data. Your data, your DNA sequencing will get stored for most of the time, and some patients don't want that out there. Some patients don't want to undergo any extra scans or radiation or things like that, and not everyone is a good trial candidate. So it's important that your oncologist, who knows you the best, goes through and explains what are the pieces of this that will impact you personally. Features of the trial, I think we've covered pretty well already, but what is the risks and what are the benefits? Early phase trials tend to be a little bit more inclusive. They'll take multiple types of cancer. They're usually small numbers that they're enrolling to test the safety of these different drugs and other things. And there's also smaller numbers of trials, so it's hard to get a spot. But later phase trials are bigger, safer. They've already gone through the safety studies. Now we're looking to see how well it works, and there's usually more spots. We look at your targets. So we talked about this, matching your mutation profile that we get through that next generation sequencing. And then is the type of intervention appropriate for you? We have things like, infusions and pills. And as Dr. Harris mentioned, sometimes it's easier for patients to take pills at home rather than have to come in for their infusions. There's devices and things you have to wear, radiation, things you're exposed to. So there's all sorts of different things involved in trials that it's not always just medications. Things that I don't get to decide about trials, I don't decide the official protocol. That goes through incredible screening, months, sometimes years of work to even be open as a trial. It gets looked at scientifically, the rationale behind it, whether or not this is safe, whether or not it's going to work, what are the studies that were done in the lab, in the animals, all of that data gets reviewed, and I don't control any of that. And I don't control the rules about who is allowed on or off the trial. And oftentimes I'm equally disappointed when my patients are not qualified for trials as they are, because I'm limited in my treatment options for this disease, and I look for trials, as Dr. Harris said, at every single stage in your treatment course. And I'm very disappointed when little things disqualify patients from being enrolled in trials, but I understand it's there to keep patients safe. And I also don't get to decide what group you get assigned to, especially in a randomized trial. It really is randomized, and I have zero say, zero power over that. So logistics, are they recruiting? That can mean a lot of different things. Generally, it means it's at least open at an institution somewhere, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's available spots, especially in safety trials. There often ends up being a waiting list, and that's because they only want to put a certain number of patients onto a trial at a time to make sure that they are safe. And then if that happens, then they will allow additional patients to enroll. So the time commitment also is an important piece of this, and it is so highly variable. Oftentimes the trials are front loaded, meaning you'll have a couple of extra visits at the front when they screen you for the trial. That might involve things like an EKG or ultrasound of your heart or things like that, that you otherwise wouldn't need to do. And then usually there's also follow-up time, because these trials are designed to see how patients do over time. So we need to follow you over time, and that can often mean months or even years of follow-up even after you're off of the trial. And a lot of patients want to know, can I travel to and from, or do I have to stay where I'm getting treated? And that completely depends on the trial and is something that we can look at and the study coordinator goes over with you before you ever enroll in a trial. These are some questions I would recommend that you ask of your team. So knowing the potential benefits is really the main thing. That's the reason any of us are looking at trials. And what are the possible risks? We may not know. If it's a new drug, we may not know. What data is there for the drug? So has it only been in animals? Has it been in humans? Do we know if this works? And especially in pancreatic cancer specifically. And how about how many more visits there are compared to standard of care? It can sometimes get at this question of time commitment. You're going to be traveling for treatment anyway. Are there extra visits? That's really what the question is. How many extra times do I have to come? Do I have to go extra testing like a biopsy that otherwise I wouldn't? And that can really be a deal breaker for patients. Some patients don't want to do that, and that is perfectly fair. And is this trial the next best thing for me? And your oncologist knows you the best. And I've sort of laid out some examples of sometimes you're not a good fit for a trial, even if on paper you would fit. And what are the other treatment options if I don't do this trial? And asking to see the patient consent form. That is something, it's a document that any study coordinator can produce for you. It goes very detailed, much more detailed than even clinicaltrials.gov, and walks you through at patient level language. What do I need to do for this trial? What are the risks and what are the benefits? Safety is our number one priority. You are not a guinea pig. I think I've gone over this extensively. There is a lot of testing that happens before the trial ever opens. There are also set pause points during the trial for safety and efficacy, meaning how well does it work, so that patients, if you're on an arm of a trial where we are showing that there is a benefit to a drug, and you're not on that arm of the trial, there are points where we will stop the trial and say, we now know that we are under treating these patients, and you will get moved to the other arm of the trial. We don't want to undertreat anyone's cancer, especially in pancreatic cancer. There's also the flip side, early termination. If a study is showing lack of safety or lack of efficacy, we will stop the trial early because we're depriving patients of the best care. And this goes around and around in circles. We are constantly looking at the data as it comes out. As I said, extensive ethical and scientific review process. There's transparency in our data reporting. You will not get patient level data because of protection and privacy laws, but the data gets pooled together and it will be reported, and it has to be reported to the FDA. You cannot hide data from a trial. Mandatory data reporting, and long-term follow-up. So there's phase 4 studies where it's been approved by the FDA, but it's still under study to prove that in large populations there aren't rare, very severe possible outcomes that would be negative for patients. And you maintain your autonomy. You can pull out of a trial anytime you want. The study coordinators don't like it because it complicates data analysis. But as your oncologist, I will always advocate for you to maintain your autonomy, and you rule consent, and you can say no at any point. Talk to your oncologist. That's really the summary of what I want to say today. We are here to help guide you. We are here to translate for you. We are here to help you figure out your next steps. You are not alone. So this very confusing diagram starts with your cancer diagnosis. You reach out to these partners who will help you. Then you talk to your oncologist. Talk to your oncologist. That's the moral of the story. And this happens at every time. So this is not a stagnant process. This is dynamic, and we look over and over again. When we make decisions, we look for trials. And then ultimately we find, is there one that's a good fit for you? And that's the best trial fit, and we take all the confusion out of it. But you are your best advocate. And that's really what this comes down to as well, is you have to advocate for yourself. So talk to your oncologist. You are your best advocate. Trials are constantly moving. You are not alone. Use your team. That includes the Sky Foundation, other patient advocacy groups, Trican Health. There's a lot of resources out there, and I can help direct you to those as well. Trials are safe, and they offer an opportunity to get access to new treatments. So I just want to thank everyone for having me today, for Trican Health and Sky Foundation for sponsoring this event and for inviting me to be part of it. Thank you.
Fantastic discussion. I have one question that I would love to ask of you, Dr. Mills, which is someone online asks, how might you handle trials that involve de-escalation of therapy where treatment might be less than standard of care? Any comments on that?
Yeah, we are not doing very many de-escalation trials in pancreatic cancer for very obvious reasons. We're terrible at treating it, so there's nothing to de-escalate. We do them sometimes in breast cancer does a lot of them because we're much better at treating breast cancer, and there are de-escalation trials, and they are done very carefully with some of those built-in safety data analysis points that I was mentioning. We will analyze that data within just a few months on treatment, and if we see any hint that we are under-treating patients, the trial is stopped and patients are put back on standard of care. But it is important to do those de-escalation trials because anyone who's gotten chemo knows that it's not fun. And so anything we can do to minimize the toxicity and still get the same benefit is important.
Fantastic. And Dr. Mills, you summarized very nicely your key points, which is, you're your best advocate, and to be sure to talk to your oncologist, bring a couple of trial options potentially, but always know that you have those resources to ask for. Dr. Harris, if you were to summarize a sort of one or two key points that you'd want folks online to take away from your presentation, what would those points be, please?
I think it would be similar to Dr. Mills's points, which is consider clinical trials at every step of treatment decision making and be an informed patient, having information, using resources available to you, asking questions is so important. Informed patients are the most powerful in a moment that feels really powerless. So those would be my two key points. And I would say my third point is I am optimistic about the future of pancreatic cancer treatments because every week, we update our site every week. Every week, there are at least 2 new clinical trials that are added to the database. So that's reason for hope for the future of new treatments for pancreatic cancer.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Dr. Harris. Thank you, Dr. Mills. Such valuable information. And thank you, Mike, for moderating and making our Q&A session a quick one today. So thank you all for joining us. Our next session, we will be talking about clinical trials right here in Michigan. We hope you'll join us again. On behalf of Sky Foundation and Trican Health, thank you for being here and taking the time to learn about your options. We'll see you next time.